Welcome, everybody. To respect everybody's time, we're going to start with the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the project website. So it will be made available to anyone who wasn't able to attend the meeting today, or if you joined late and wanted to catch up on some of the discussion from the front end of the meeting, rest assured that it will be made available. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be taking a few, we're excited by the interest in this meeting. We're nearing 270 participants already, and we're excited by the opportunity that the site presents for the city. So thank you for taking the time tonight to join us. We did attempt to reach as many participants as possible. We sent out physical mailers that extended beyond the standard circulation requirements, advertised through media, and provided a new project website as a central source of information for the public. This website will be updated throughout the process with any information that you're looking for relating to this project. And we're really humbled to have you here with us this evening. Thank you for your interest in the project. My name is Lena Aldejani, and I'm a senior associate at SVN Architects and Planners. I will be facilitating the meeting this evening. The purpose of the meeting today is to provide you with an update on the plans for the site and the next steps in the process for its redevelopment. We have a tight agenda, and I will try to keep us on time. We will go through a 20-minute presentation followed by a 30-minute question and answer period, and we will close the meeting with some final remarks. Please note that we will be recording the meeting today, as to make it available for those who could not join us. And the recording will be available on the project website. That's raildecreset.com. For the session today, please submit any questions through the Q&A feature. The button will be located at the bottom of your screen. We will collect your questions throughout the presentation and respond through a panel discussion during the question and answer period. And rest assured, for any questions that we can't cover during today's session, we are publishing a list of frequently asked questions on the project website that will be published in about a week's time from the presentation. So please do send us your questions. We are monitoring and will respond to the best of our ability. Before we start, we wanted to acknowledge that we are working on and discussing lands covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaty. These lands have been cared for thousands of years by many nations, including the Mississaugas, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The city of Toronto is now home to the fourth largest urban Indigenous population in Canada and is shared by many Indigenous, Métis, and non-Indigenous peoples. The Raildeck district is located above what once was the shoreline of Lake Ontario, used by First Nations and Indigenous peoples for hunting, fishing, gathering, and healing. In the spirit of their traditional teachings, we recognize our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jamie McKenna, who will say a few words on behalf of the development team.
Thank you, Lena. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jamie McKenna. I'm the Managing Director and Group Head of Real Estate for Fengate Asset Management. Fengate is proud to be working alongside our partners at Craft Developments and Kingsman as we manage this transformational development on behalf of LiUNA Pension Fund of Central and Eastern Canada. Tonight is an important first step in our ongoing commitment to engage the community and other key stakeholders in a process we're calling Raildeck Reset. As you may know, discussions about the future of this vital corridor have been going on for over 8 years. We truly feel that now is the opportune time to move the conversation forward. We want to work together to achieve the best possible outcome. Toronto is in the midst of a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, and suffers from a lack of public amenity space in the core. Transformational development is coming to this site to help address these challenges. The Raildeck is a chance to address all three of these vital issues by decking over airspace and unlocking a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We're focused on addressing demands for increasing housing in Toronto, providing new transit-oriented and family-friendly options in the heart of the city, and reclaiming a significant amount of urban space for public good. The best way to get to a final version everyone can be proud of is by collaborating and working together, and that is the purpose of the Raildeck Reset. We look forward to hosting more of these engagements throughout the year, and I thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Jamie. And in the spirit of pushing reset on our vision to work towards the best mix of open spaces and mixed uses on the site possible, we are adding to our knowledge by blending new voices and expertise with experienced rail deck consultants, including some of the original team behind the rail deck park. So as I already mentioned, but for those who weren't able to join, my name is Lena. I will be the moderator and facilitator for this evening. Drew Sinclair, Managing Principal at SVN Architects and Planners, will be presenting and joining the panel for discussion during the question and answer period. We have Dermot Sweeney, Founding Principal of Sweeney & Co., who will be available to speak to the proposed buildings and development blocks. Peter McMillan joins us as Principal from McMillan Associates and architect from the former Rail Deck Park with an in-depth knowledge of the integral objectives of the former Rail Deck Park. Ian Graham is joining us as Director of Planning at RE Millward and is an expert at land use planning and policy in the city. He has an in-depth knowledge of the project. And Thomas Woodhull, joining us as Senior Associate from the A Group, will be available to respond to questions around mobility. So if you have specific questions to the panel, please feel free to add their names. With that, I'd like to ask Drew Sinclair to lead this presentation, and I thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, Lena. If you want to go to the next slide. So we're here today to discuss the potential future of the rail corridor between Bathurst and Blue Jays Way with, as I think all of you know, Spadina Avenue intersecting through the middle of the site, right in the heart of the city. So this is an enormous and important project. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. The image on the screen shows a view looking towards the east, taken from a little bit east of the Bathurst Bridge. It gives you a good sense of the conditions today, the scar or the cut that is a remnant of, in a lot of ways, the 19th century infrastructure that dominated the downtown core. This is a very important image, and this is probably the only chance we'll have to speak to this. There are really two very important constituent elements within the rail corridor. Both of them are quite different, and they both have very separate and different constraints that will govern or dictate how this site is built out. And they were equally constraining for both a park and a development proposal for this site. And since today we're talking about both, I want to speak to both in equal measure. To the left of the image where you see the GO trains parked, there is a rail maintenance yard that services Metrolinx infrastructure. That yard will go through a transformational improvement in the context of the GO system electrification that's planned to begin within the next 5 years. And I think that presents an important milestone for this project. This conversation is very, very important within the time frame for that project, because development over the rail corridor will be partly facilitated through that phase of improvements. To the right of the image, in the central view, looking up the rail corridor, you see the active corridor. This includes passenger, commuter passenger rail infrastructure, as well as ongoing freight rail that moves through the downtown core. And it has a different set of constraints than the maintenance yard. Those constraints include clearance requirements and restrictions on where structure can set down within the corridor itself. To the left of the image, Front Street, you can see here the well development still under construction, now largely complete. And to the right of the image, Northern Linear Park, Iceboat Terrace, as it moves across the southern edge at the north side of the City Place development. Lena, do you want to move to the next? It's important to note that while this development is being developed largely within the zone of air rights above a certain distance above the active rail corridor, it does touch the ground, and it touches the ground in two very important places here. Front Street. You're all very familiar with this condition, I'm certain. This is Front Street at the northern edge of the site, looking towards the Puente de Luz Bridge, beyond that towards Bathurst Street. This is the condition that exists there today. It's not a friendly pedestrian condition. You know, the south side doesn't have a sidewalk. Obviously, any form of development in this location is looking to improve this condition and to bring Front Street into the next generation of what an urban active transportation conduit should be. Next slide. On the south side, City Place has evolved into an active and lively community. So connections to the north are still challenged and largely funneled through the Puente de Luz Bridge. It's an important piece of pedestrian infrastructure and public art that spans the rail corridor today. But despite the lack of connections between north and south, both sides of the corridor are rich with amenities and, of course, iconic city landmarks. So there's an opportunity through what we're going to be speaking about today to connect these two split portions of city fabric together through a kind of comprehensive rethinking of what may happen between Bathurst and Blue Jays Way. Next. So the redevelopment is looking into 3 distinct development blocks. So each that'll have its own character. The deck and buildings within these blocks will be delivered in full by the Craft Kingsman Fengate Rail team with review and approval of this application, any forthcoming application by the City of Toronto. So we're at a stage now where no application has been met. We're at the very preliminary phases of the conversation. Everything we talk about today, to a degree, is still plastic, which means your input, the input of others, and I'll speak to the time frame in a moment, will be folded into the materials developed for this project as it moves forward. Next. So through coordination with the City of Toronto, I'll speak to the ongoing conversations that have taken place since May of 2021. There was an identified need for a statutory public park contribution of 1.03 hectares. That's, for those of us, or for those of you that still speak in acres, that's approximately 2.5 acres. So considering the nature of the site, CKF, it's Craft Kingsman Fengate, will contribute the air rights for the park, and it's assumed, this is still to be resolved with the city, that the deck and finishes for the park would be delivered by the city. Now, what has been happening, or what we've been working on with the city for the last year, is trying to understand how additional contributions from the Craft Kingsman Fengate team, I'll refer to them as the CKF team for the rest of this presentation, could be possible, and the quantum of those, and certainly, and maybe most importantly, the efficiencies that can be gained through the co-delivery of really the 3 fundamental parts of this proposed rail deck district, those being badly needed housing and the mixed use components that go along with it, affordable housing, and then a potential large component of public park that can really only be delivered through partnership with the city. Next. So we're also working with the city to strive towards delivering a modified but generous 11-acre rail deck park. And I want to be really straight, really clear on this. The city isn't committed as of yet, and it's really important that the city will go through its own process to determine how the larger park could be delivered here. But there's a potential to deliver a generous 11-acre rail deck park within this corridor, inclusive of, as I mentioned, the statutory park contribution, public park contribution of 2.5 acres, and then a further 7.5 acres of consolidated public park, partly built over what we're calling opportunity lands. So Lena, if you wouldn't mind just toggling the cursor over top of the opportunity lands. We describe them as opportunity lands. They really are just that. They're the components of air rights that would be offered to the city to allow for the creation of a contiguous east-west park landscape between Bathurst Street and Spadina. It's also important to note that design elements within the development blocks, within the west block, central block, and east block that you see here, have all been considered to date in a manner that assumes there is a public park at the southern edge. And in the event that the public park can't be realized, certainly the development would evolve to accommodate some other forms of connectivity. But today, we're here to talk about the potential with the working with the city to deliver a park in partnership. Lena? The public park configuration itself, and we don't want to give the impression that there is a determined park form yet. An important part of the ongoing conversations with the city, beyond the application for a zoning bylaw amendment that's likely to be made in the early spring, will be the form of park, the specific form of park for the statutory park contribution. So on this slide is a sampling of many of the options that have been discussed in workshop conversations with the city to date, and that includes potentially spreading out the 2.5 acre contribution, so it could create opportunities for public park fronting onto Bathurst or Spadina, improved connectivity north-south at those locations, a reduced public park in the central portion, or potentially an elongated, less public park frontage at the foot of Portland on Front Street, an elongated public park contribution that really achieves more of what was anticipated within the shoreline stitch thinking that was integrated into the downtown plan. Lena, next slide. So the preliminary concept we're sharing today is also predicated on a couple of key, I'll call them transfers of value. And one important one is the Front Street public right-of-way. So there's a proposed reduction in the public, in the Front Street right of way with the of approximately 4 meters, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. But there's also a proposed acquisition of the Puente de Luz Bridge air rights, and this would include the developer's obligation to work with the city and finding a suitable relocation site for the Puente de Luz Bridge, and then integrating those air rights or the value captured from those air rights into a plan for delivery of a new public park in the same location. So these land swaps require coordination with the city and are intended to really improve the public realm conditions along Front Street, improve the animating condition happening internal to the blocks along Front Street, and then improve circulation and access to the public park and to the through block connections that we'll speak about in a moment. I'll elaborate that in a few minutes. Next slide. We're still at a very early stage of the development process. This timeline speaks a little bit to what we've been going through with the development team and with a working group set up with the City of Toronto beginning in May 2021. And as all of you are fully aware, and as Jamie mentioned, there's been an ongoing series of conversations about about these lands over the last 8 years, and truthfully for time before that as well. The reset that occurred in 2021 was the beginning of a collaborative process, representation of both the city and the developers working group coming together to put in place really a framework that could allow for mixed use development, the delivery of market housing and affordable housing on the northern edge of the blocks, with the potential for a collaborative approach to building parkland at the south. This is tonight, February 23rd, is our first public conversation through the formalization of this reset, but it's not in any way the final conversation. I'll ask maybe all of you to consider the announcement this week of a development partner selected by Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto for the Quayside lands, a portion of the East Bayfront precinct within the Central Waterfront. And maybe to remind everyone, when the vision for Quayside began to emerge, it was around 2005 with initiation of the precinct planning process that led to a site and area specific policy, which led to a zoning for the area that's ultimately led to a collective vision as demonstrated by the work done by Dreams team that was so publicly presented this week. It's really extraordinary outcome from a very long planning process. We're right at the beginning. So this is the first public meeting of Reset. We are planning for a zoning bylaw amendment submission and a new OPA submission in the near spring, early spring 2022. And then in the fullness of time, once we've had a chance to engage with staff and staff have had a chance to completely review, we will be coming back to you for a second engagement session, hopefully within the late spring to early summer of this year. There are a series of meetings that'll be held in the intervening period, and some of you will be participating in those. There's a series of already arranged meetings with a number of stakeholder groups from the precinct, and there will continue to be an ongoing working group process with the city throughout review of the application. Next. As I mentioned at the outset, this is an extraordinarily important site in the downtown, and it will yield a potentially transformational development for a long neglected piece of the city. We're beyond the area where we can think about single use corridors or large land holdings in the next version of the city giving way to a single use, the single use corridors of the past generation giving use to a single use future. This site should not be rail corridor moving forward. It should present a suture, a restitching together of city fabric that's really necessary here to achieve both a broader range of community benefits, including accessibility and porosity, permeability as is stated here, but also to fulfill other policy objectives that have been developed by the city over years with regard to east-west connections, the shoreline stitch that first evolved in the city's downtown plan, TL Core. We have been working with the city to put in place a framework that imagines protecting of certain key sky views from north-south corridors, both south and north of the rail corridor. I'll speak to those in greater length later on. Enhanced frontages were one of the key critical insights brought by the city and brought by the community through the evaluation or review of a previous version of a development proposal for this site. And we've done a lot in the intervening period to try to imagine what improvements, including the Front Street right-of-way change, that will allow for continuous animation, useful frontages, more public-friendly frontages, both on the Front Street side, but also on the park side. This site sits in proximity to multiple forms of higher order transit, and it, very importantly, is directly adjacent to a planned new investment in a commuter rail facility at the intersection of Front and Spadina, or adjacent to the intersection of Front and Spadina. So it's critical in the context of the larger policy framework to imagine how this sits into the planning for long-term transit, improving ridership, and assuring that other investments in the post-carbon future are facilitated or supported by planned multi-residential development and new affordable housing. This development will deliver a significant quantity of affordable housing. The redevelopment also presents a number of opportunities to achieve a resilient community. And speaking at a very high level, developing the air rights above the rail corridor, we're making for a more efficient use of the land. We're taking what is today, as I mentioned, a single use landscape and turning it into one that can yield multiple uses. I mentioned housing, affordable housing, and park as the triad of incredible outcomes that will come from this process. But in addition to that, there will be potentially community facilities that serve a range of users within the existing communities and the new community coming to the site. We are currently investing quite a bit of time into understanding energy options for the community and understanding this as in addition to the embodied carbon story that will be told here, that this will be could be potentially a significant contributor to the sustainable energy or could deliver, a sustainable energy option for the downtown west side. And very much related to the sustainability story, we are exploring stormwater management solutions, both for the development itself and currently at present, trying to anticipate what the stormwater requirements will be for any potential public park that abuts or relies on structural integration of the development. Stormwater is a key consideration here. The integration of landscape open spaces, both in the development blocks and potentially through the rail corridor development, we hope that this project can play a role in increasing the city's biodiversity and obviously carbon sequestration for the larger downtown west side community. And by providing additional community services and amenities, as I mentioned earlier, including potential parks, but also daycares, food, and other retail, we hope that the development could contribute to the quality of life, as I mentioned, for existing communities, but also future residents. Next. So our team's currently involving a concept that imagines three distinct development blocks to be built with a full rail deck park, potentially through public-private partnership. I've already spoken to the fact that we are working with the city on trying to evolve a story that allows for some form of partnership to deliver the park. But the development blocks themselves are intended to be fully delivered and paid for by the development itself. The reorganization of the blocks along Front Street into these discrete blocks also has the potential to deliver really visually distinct presence onto Front, but the breakdown of each of the blocks into discrete components, the center block particularly into two discrete blocks, allows for the kind of visual porosity and distinction that was described in some of the early criticism of past development schemes for the site. Next. The concept prioritizes public realm frontages, including both Front Street and the potential park, locating retail, community, and other public amenities along the edges, wrapping around where the blocks return and come into the park. Creates a context where we can imagine the northern edge of any potential public park having active uses that could spill out, engage, or in a way animate or accentuate the quality of the park space. And Front Street, similarly, one of the key fundamental differences from what you see here and what has been shared previously, going back several years to previous iterations for the site, is all retail on the edges of the street and the edges of outdoor public spaces. There's no internalized retail concourse. There was a number of media outlets shared a concept that was developed in the context of an OPA submission from several years ago. That concept is not what we're here today to discuss. Reset has allowed us to start from zero and try to imagine where retail should be, what should be animating, contributing to the quality of the streets at both the north and the south side of the development. Next. Now, the concept does also contain parking, a component of parking, although as suggested, a very low ratio is what's being explored today within the development blocks itself. So because the development is being built on a deck surface, what we've done is pulled the parking back. There were, again, referring back to an earlier concept that was shared several years ago. All the parking has come out of what could possibly be public park deck here, and it's come into the development, elevated and contained within the podium at grade, at the levels above grade, front onto the street and onto the park. The parking is enclosed within active frontages, retail, community uses, flex spaces, amenity. The other effort that's been made in the current round of development, and as Alina mentioned, Tom Woodhull is here on the panel tonight to answer any questions you may have about this, but there's been an effort to actually internalize a lot of the servicing and loading functions within the block itself, creating a kind of service concourse that takes place internal to the block, shielded by retail and public amenity spaces fronting onto the park into the street. And that's allowed us to minimize curb cuts and service entry points into the block, really prioritizing the front street public realm for pedestrians and active transportation. Next. So the plan contemplates a series of entries to the parks and open spaces, really prioritizing both north-south access at key intervals. Here along Spadina Avenue, between the Metrolink zone parcel that fronts at Front Street and Spadina, and then at the foot of the really significant and important well pops, which is in alignment with Capriole Court to the south. The idea that there will be an open air public passageway connection at that location, connecting up with an accessible grade across the park deck towards Capriole Court. We envision a really important landing moment, and one that we've been long discussing with the city at the foot of Portland, where there will likely be public park, ideally public park frontage, subject to agreement with the city. And then of course, at the intersection of Front and Bathurst, although grades present challenges there, we're envisioning different ways of bringing visitors from grade up onto a potential public park landscape in that location. From the south, each of the north-south roads within the City Place community will arrive at a gradual accessible landscape slope that will allow for movement up onto the park. It's important to note when you look at this, and one thing that we won't be speaking to today, but over time it'll be a focal point of the conversation, will be the change in grade or elevation. These aren't flat surfaces. I suppose terrace rises as you move towards the east. Front Street stays relatively consistent, but rises and falls slowly. So an important consideration for us is assuring that as we design the development blocks, understanding that through the work of the city, we're going to have to figure out how elevations for the park remain accessible at the edges. Each of these public park entry points we're going to have to consider differently. It's a really important challenge when we're about to meet. So thinking about the adjustment to Front Street, I mentioned the proposal currently includes a modification of the width of the Front Street right of way. You can see here in blue the proposed narrowing of the Front Street right of way, while still preserving a full 6-meter public realm component or public sidewalk on the south side of Front Street to match the northern edge, a reduction in the functional width of the Front Street road, while still allowing for a full turning movements and a turning lane through the center of the block. What this allows us to do throughout the development blocks themselves is to actually have a functional, really excellent retail depth or lobby depth, animating spaces depth directly off of Front Street, right at grade. You can see here very clearly from the edge of the maintenance yard, where the last tracks reside, where the retaining wall currently sits at the edge. If without the extension, the limited space that would be available both to come in and move up through the development, or in the context of a public park, to traverse up and above those the maintenance rail and the clearance requirements in order to get up to the top or the functional rail or the functional park elevation. Next slide. So speaking about the park elevation, this is a view from the foot of Portland, looking at the kind of Portland traverse on the left-hand side, north to south, again demonstrating with the additional reduction in Front Street right-of-way, still retaining that 6-meter sidewalk, how we can accommodate a gradual feathered slope. Certainly this isn't a design deck. We'll be working with the city ideally to figure out an optimal way of constructing the actual park deck itself, integrating with the likely structural deck that'll be delivered as part of the development. But the key consideration is to plan for and provide enough space to assure a fully accessible park landscape if one can be achieved. Next. Visual porosity has been a key aspect or desire of the city in this location for a long time. In the planning of City Place, there was key consideration to where towers were located to protect or preserve certain sky views. Thinking about alignments from the foot of Draper Street, outlook south through the Parade condominium towers and towards Canoe Landing Park, or through the overall master plan that informed the way the well development was built out, and the central POPs, the public open space that comes through the publicly accessible, privately owned public open space that comes through the main part of the well, lined by retail, ultimately aligning with Capriole Court within City Place to the south. Obviously, the alignment of Portland with Dan Leckie Way to the south is another key consideration, and the similarly Telegram Muse and its alignment with the edge of the Metrolink site and the potential opening is key as well. But in imagining how these blocks and the towers, the higher density or taller forms of development will actually reside on these sites, we've been working with the city on prioritizing these key selective sky views and ensuring that each of these public passageways aligns with a separation, or more than adequate separation between each of the towers. The tower separation distance, as it is currently being considered, varies between 25 and 34 meters between the tower components themselves. Next. And the second consideration, obviously, to how height or how taller elements will be deployed on the site. This is one of the key outcomes of the city conversation, is protecting or minimizing net new shadows on some of the really key and important public spaces in the communities to the north, where there may ultimately be some residual shadow impact resulting from development. Victoria Memorial Square on the left, Clarence Square Park here. Next. So we're at the portion of the discussion where we want to open up the floor and receive some questions from you. As Lena mentioned, I'm going to turn the floor back over to her in a second. What we're trying to do here is to, in a way, start from scratch and trying to imagine what the key considerations should be that'll inform development on in these lands. And perhaps more importantly, how, what are the key considerations that we need to take into account in imagining how potentially a city or a partnership delivered park should rub up or touch against developments like this. The themes that we've identified are preliminary. Certainly, we expect some of your contributions to be reflected in the next iteration of this presentation. So, Lena, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Drew. And if I can ask the panelists to turn on their screens. Before we dive into the question and answer period, though, I did want to say that the development team, including Kraft Kingsman Fengate, as well as the UNA Pension Fund of Central and Eastern Canada, are all excited to hear your thoughts and contributions, what you would like to see on this site and the exciting potential that it offers. And before we dive in as well, I do want to mention that Councillor Joe Cressy is a participant tonight, and it is here to provide some comments. So please welcome Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Lena. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thanks.
Well, listen, for everybody who's joining in here today, it goes without saying that this is a big discussion about the future of our city. And there's been a lot of discussion in the presentation we just saw about collaboration with the city. And as the city councillor for the area, I wanted to provide a few comments on my view on the status of this proposal and on the future. Let me first of all just tell you very frankly my view. As the city councillor, and I can tell you from multiple conversations with lots of folks at the city, we still believe deeply in the city's vision for Rail Deck Park. That is a vision for a 21-acre central park in the heart of Toronto, in the heart of downtown Toronto, where our population has grown from 130,000 15 years ago to 270,000 today, to expected to be 500,000 people in 20 years. This is and remains within the core, the last continuous space for a new central park for the hundreds of thousands who live here and as a citywide destination. That vision for Rail Deck Park, is it ambitious? It is. Is it a big idea? It is. Is it expensive? It is. But it will be worth it, because 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when we look back on the growth of the city, a central park is something that we will all remember. And I think I have to tell you, as a city leader, you have to have the courage and the vision, but you also have to have the willingness to invest as governments. And that vision for a central park, it was right in 2016, it's right today, and in 50 years for future generations, it will absolutely be right. Now, specifically on this proposal, I want to tell you that we are highly skeptical. And I think it needs to be clear for everybody who's joining here tonight. The proposal you've seen for 11 towers involves city-owned land. It involves building over part of Front Street. It involves, which the city owns. It involves building over the Puente de Luz Bridge that the city owns. And it involves using part of Northern Linear Park that the city owns. To put it simply, what you're seeing here proposed cannot be built without the city. And to be clear, it's not as simple as it's presented on paper or on screen. This is not 11 buildings and an 11-acre park. Rather, this is a proposal for 11 buildings, 2.5 acres of air to be provided to the city, with the expectation that the city would then spend $860 million to build an 11-acre park. So if you thought it was tough convincing city council to build a 21-acre park, try convincing them to build a $1 billion 11-acre park. So this is a multi-year-long process. And I will tell you, if the developer submits this, there will be extensive review by the city, and we welcome that review. But our vision remains for Rail Deck Park. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor, and we appreciate your comments and your perspective today. So thank you for joining us. I do want to make sure that we have enough time for the questions that are coming in, and we are a little bit tight on time. So with that, we'll just dive right in. So the first question is around whether the city has approved our proposal. I believe Councillor Joe Cressy has addressed that quite adequately. We are in a preliminary stage of the application process. We have not yet made a formal application for this concept, and we anticipate a lot of conversation. This will be a long process. So I'll just move on to the next question. How will this project address local infrastructure needs such as public transit, traffic, and pragmatic commercial needs? I'm wondering if, because of the focus on mobility here, maybe I could ask Thomas to speak to it, and I would welcome any other panelists to join the conversation as well.
Sure, thanks, Lena. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Obviously, transportation and mobility is a big part of this project. There's a question about what does the project provide, and I think there's a few answers to that question depending on how you get around. One of the most important things that the project does is, from a pedestrian perspective, can help stitch together parts of the city that are currently separated. As Drew mentioned earlier, there's a thriving community on the south, and with the well development and the existing buildings on the north, a growing community there, and the opportunities to get from north to south. If you want to go from the north side to a grocery store on the south side, for example, or to the schools, your options to get across north-south are relatively limited. So one of the keys for this project is to offer a way for pedestrians to traverse what is currently a pretty big, as Drew put it, it sutures together what is currently a scar in the city from a pedestrian perspective. Contributions to transit are interesting. There have been a number of comments, I assume, a number of questions a few of you probably have about how it works with the rail. Metrolinx currently owns the rights and is developing a station at the corner of Front and Spadina. That was indicated on a few of the plans. So obviously Metrolinx is a big part of what's going on, particularly below the air rights. This project's not looking, it's not taking away rail lines to put buildings in. It's actually working above the existing and planned infrastructure. So there are expansions to the rail network that are going to be happening in line, as Drew mentioned, with this project. So there's, the ability to integrate or to be located in close proximity to future rail infrastructure is pretty key. Similarly, the project is located, as you all well know, relatively close to future and planned stops on the Ontario line, and it takes advantage of both the Spadina and the Bathurst streetcar, two of the city's busiest streetcar routes. So from a mobility perspective, it does a lot in terms of using both pedestrian and transit infrastructure as a way of getting people around, understanding that the area is fairly congested from a traffic perspective. I think the other thing it does really well is improve Front Street, which has for a long time in the city's history been used as sort of an expressway for automobiles to get out of downtown. Given the amount of residential population that's come up in the area, it's about time that street changes. So this project's looking to improve the south side of Front Street and make it something that's worthy of the people who live around it.
Thank you, Tom. Perhaps I can move to another question around timelines and expectations for the application. So if it were to go smoothly and the application was to be approved, how soon is construction intended? Maybe I'll preface that a little bit with Councillor Joe Cressy's statement about the city's position, or the councillor's position, and the city's review process. So I wonder, Ian, if you could maybe speak a little bit about the development approvals process, the timeframes that we might be expecting, and just the process of review by the city that we could anticipate for a project like this.
Thanks, Lena, very much. Basically, there are, I would say, 3 different processes that are going to be involved. Number 1 will be the rezoning of the area Currently, it's only zoned for transportation use associated with the Metrolinx corridor. So now there's going to need to be a change for the zoning bylaw to actually allow development and a future deck, if you will, for park area, for public park. So that needs to be examined. There'll be some amendments, slight amendments needed to the official plan amendment that was approved by the OMB or the LPAT recently, which will also be part of those submissions. And then we anticipate down the road, there will then need to be site plan applications for the buildings themselves and the development areas themselves as they go online. So it's a 3-stage process. And I anticipate that'll be the zoning and the OP first, and then subsequently site development plans for the various buildings before after the zoning has actually been put into place. And in terms of timing, it'll be years. It's a long process regardless. We've seen that in other developments, and involving this scale of development, it will be years before we get to that point.
Thank you, Ian. And perhaps maybe if we're speaking about timelines and intent with the application, Drew, would you be able to share a little bit around the public experience, public engagement, and just the working process that is expected with the city and with city staff?
Absolutely. So we anticipate, I think, three streams of work going forward with the city. As I mentioned before, there has been a working group process with representation from various city divisions inputting on everything from park configuration to principles around accessibility and identifying urban design constraints that need to be resolved through this application. And so that process we anticipate to continue moving forward, and the meetings to date have been quarterly, and it will likely accelerate once there is an application under review and we can meet with greater frequency. We are proposing, there are a number of meetings with stakeholders, including the BIA for the community to the north, and a number of additional resident organizations and stakeholder groups from the community. Those meetings are starting immediately within the next week. And again, we anticipate ongoing and regular conversations. But the maybe most meaningful for the participants today, there is a proposed submission that Ian mentioned a moment ago that will be in the next few months, in early spring. And the city will take time to review, and then we'll be issuing fulsome comments on that. And we work with, and ideally we have a chance to continue to work with the councillor's office through that review process. And in the lead up to the next public meeting, we'll likely formally work together to arrange the public meeting and then come forward with presentations from both the city, the councillor, and ourselves. So at present, that is contingent on the submission and the review timeframe that Ian spoke about. But we don't really anticipate the process ending with 2 public engagement sessions. There's a number of blocks, each will evolve in character and in use with the other components that will be resolved internal to the blocks. And so as we move forward over the next really year or years in the further evolution of this plan, we will likely go into a scenario where we're meeting on a regular basis and really extending the use of the digital platform that's being created for engagement so that we can both release and receive information through it. So we'll again reshare the RailDeck Reset web portal that's been set up to collect information and feedback for this project at the tail of this meeting, and it'll be an actively managed portal from here moving forward.
Thank you, Drew. And perhaps I can ask you another question while we're here.
Go ahead.
Is it true that the development doesn't work without city land?
So I've no, that's not true, actually. Not to contest I think the really important message the councillor just delivered about the necessity and importance of park, and that's critical and understood. And I think that's probably why a lot of the constrained elements of parks within previous reviewed schemes have been removed. And there is a question that isn't in this list of questions here, and I just want to answer it anyway. There's a question asking for clarification of who owns the air rights. The Kraft, Kingsman, and Fengate team owns the air rights, and what's partly contributing to the opportunity today is that there is a proposal that the air rights for more than the 2.5 hectares could be 2.5 acre statutory contribution could be contributed towards the delivery of the park. That's new. That's something that's kind of exciting, and I want to just reiterate that. But the development blocks themselves and the deck that's being built to accommodate development can be built completely without the use of public lands. So the desire to increase the parcels to the north and reduce the Front Street right-of-way is not to increase the scale of development, but to increase the accessibility and increase the potential for animating uses along Front Street. It is to accommodate a better Front Street. So absent that widening, there's a very narrow strip of land which can be used at grade within the development blocks themselves that will be used largely to transition up to a level above Front Street. But if the desire is to have retail animating uses, public entries, lobbies along Front Street, there is great benefit to the city and the users of Front Street to accommodate that reduction. And I think that's something we're actively working on, both with transportation services staff to understand what the implications are for Front Street. And Tom's been involved in those conversations. And of course, internally to the team to figure out every possible means of making sure that space is being given to best use. It's also important to note that the work being done by Metrolinx and the concept developments that were done for the Metrolinx parcel, there's currently an open tender. The Metrolinx is looking for a development partner for the lands at the intersection of Spadina and Front, and the concept development put forth by Metrolinx also included a similar reduction in Front Street right of way. So there's for the same reasons. So the without the park landing on Northern Linear Park, there is no need for a structural touch point on the southern extent of the rail corridor. And I think it's maybe one thing we need to clarify here. So there is potential for development happening here without public land coming into play, but there's tremendous benefit if we can figure out a way to work together to realize not just an integrated development, but also to take advantage of what we anticipate to be the cost benefits of co-delivery, building a public deck at the same time as a private deck to accommodate a public park along with private development, so that the two can come online concurrently and we can deliver a community here in time and in lockstep with a major piece of public infrastructure.
Thank you, Drew. If I could maybe pose the next question to Dermot. So along the same lines, is it the intention then to tear down the Puente de Luz bridge? Oh, sorry, Dermot. You are still on mute.
We go. Is that better? Yes.
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. The question was, can we remove the bridge, or
Is it the intention to tear it down?
Yeah. I think if we build a bridge by way of a park linking the two sides, then the need for the bridge is certainly reduced, if not eliminated. And I think what we're working on now is a way to increase the amount of park that comes out onto Front Street and carries straight through to the Northern Linear Park, and then extends east-west behind any development on Front Street. So yeah, we could certainly do it with the bridge remaining. We can build a development, or we could remove it and build a park in its place.
Thank you, Dermot. And it looks like Drew may have some additional thoughts to share.
This is just to say that there has been conversation with the city about this, and the concept was developed, cognizant of, I guess, some degree of willingness to explore relocation of the bridge. I think the term in the question was tear down, and is by no means what's intended. It's to remove and relocate. And the conversations about a suitable relocation site haven't been started yet. And I think that requires its own public discussion of where that bridge can serve the greatest public good.
Thank you, Drew. Another one here for Dermot. If the park is only 2.5 acres, will the buildings and the development blocks include green spaces like terraces or rooftops for dogs? The mute button.
Yes, absolutely. There will be lots of amenity space. As you could see by the early analyses of where buildings would go, number one, they're adjacent to Front Street to free up as much of the park as possible in the south, but also they're separated. We're working with the city guidelines around tall buildings and or requirements or rules. And there will be lots of roof garden and amenity space between the buildings. Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on, I'll try to squeeze in another couple of questions before we end the meeting to respect everybody's time. And rest assured, any questions that we don't respond to today will be posted on the project website through the frequently asked questions. So for this one, Ian, if I could ask you, have you considered the growth and current amount of children that now live in the area?
Absolutely. As part of the submission, we're going to do studies regarding community facilities and services, and the need for example, daycare, which would definitely be required in this development, and the possibility of any other school requirements based on the population that's being projected for the new development. So that's part of the thing that we will submit with the applications, is the service needs to the new development as well as the surrounding area if this development were to be in place.
And I would just encourage participants, if there is an amenity that you would like to see integrated into the development that's being proposed by Craft, Kingsman, Fengate, and Leuna, please do share with us your thoughts. We'd love to see what kind of programming could be integrated into the development blocks. And last question for tonight's session, but certainly not the last question in this conversation. Peter, if I could ask you, just for a sense of scale comparison, what would you compare the proposed park in terms of acreage compared to the Canoe Landing Park? Are they around the same size, slightly bigger?
Yeah, sure.
What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Lena. So the statutory park would be slightly smaller than the Canoe Landing Park, but the potential 11-acre park would be considerably larger, almost twice the size. And you also have to consider that the park, if you think about the park going from curb to curb and where it sits in the city, it's quite a bit larger. It's a completely different environment.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. So with that, I'd like to thank our panel for joining us today and for being available to answer these questions. As I mentioned, we will be making additional questions available on the project website. The recording will also be shared on the project website for everybody's ability to share, reshare, join the conversation. A reminder also that this is just the start of the reset process. We are planning on making a preliminary high-level application for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment to the city in the early spring. And following that, we will be releasing additional dates for engagement with both targeted stakeholder groups, so think BIAs and residents associations. And then following that, we'll be looking to have additional larger open house meetings, ideally with more conversation. We're using today as an opportunity to share information about the reset. So the presentation will be available. We'll also publish the frequently asked questions. The project website information is on the screen here, and I will leave that here until the end of the session. If you have any additional thoughts or comments for the team, please do feel free to contact us at contact@realdistrict.com. On behalf of Craft, Kingsman, Fengate, and Leuna, I do want to thank you all for your participation this evening. And we do look forward to working on and evolving the plans with the city and with the community over the next few months and years. So thank you all for your participation. Have a great evening.